One of the great things about the Midwest Treaty Network is they let anyone be part of it. I find that relatively unique amidst the political atmosphere which we found ourselves in the past 10 years at least, which is to say the political correctness, which has been a theme controlled by the right, is really a theme which is also controlled by the left. And I think there are real consequences of the whole concept of political correctness. And the Midwest Treaty Network, I think, has somehow miraculously transcended that unfortunate movement which is going on. So I think it's to their credit that that exists. I say that because I carry with me a lot of inconsistencies, and I want to state the obvious that despite those inconsistencies, I bring to the table, I think, important resources for you to consider as a partner in this process. And I think we need to be forever vigilant, if you will, over whether we're excluding people at the expense of our own political correctness to be part of the council fires to find solutions. I think it's an important theme which is emerging, at least in my life. Many of you my age remember Alan Watts during the 60s revolution, in which he participated over the marriage of East and West philosophies, in which those from the Western cultures were brought together in marriage with those of the Eastern cultures. And out of that we came, I think, a little more rounded in the process. I think there needs to be another marriage, of course, and that's between North and South, so that all of the directions will be able to sit at the council fires, and out of that will come this change. So I just want to maybe bring some warnings of what inhibits us from accomplishing what's inside of our hearts, inside of our minds, inside of our bellies. And also thinking a lot about the economy in the past weeks, listening to the radio and the debates and all of that stuff. And I think there's some very interesting debates going on, which I think we can make relevant to the passions we feel for an issue. In this case, it would be what's going on with mining in northern Wisconsin. And part of the debate, I think, which interests me particularly, has to do with whether or not we as political activists, community activists, scientists, are really aware of the place we are in the debate. I think many of us think we're on the cutting edge, but when you draw the larger context, we're really quite in the middle of things, because we're using and adopting and embracing very old techniques and technologies to deal with these issues. It's a very advanced, different world than the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s as we enter the 90s. So another caution is to be, I think, absolutely sure of where we fit into this larger context. The issue for me then, and I'll get to mining hopefully, the issue for me then is balance. I think that's the issue for me of the 90s. It's the personal issue of me back to the farm. It's the issue of trying to achieve balance, assuming the assumption here, the premise here is that with balance we will have relative health. The theory is that the reason the mines in northern Wisconsin are functioning, and the reason that more threats to the region exists through oil wells and gas wells in Lake Superior and paper mills for the region has less to do with people's support of that particular type of technology or economic development, and more, I think, to do with the imbalance that we have generally in our communities, generally in our institutions. So let me put forth the notion that one of the strategies, the long-term strategy, the seventh generation strategy, has as much to do with this balancing from within and adjacent to ourselves and our own psyches as it does with affecting the next piece of legislation. Perhaps more in this case, because we have gotten ourselves so imbalanced in this process that we are running around actually quite fearful these days that if we don't get to the next public hearing, if we don't get to the next legislative debate, if we don't listen to the next NPR debate with Clinton and Perot and the other guy, that somehow the world is going to end by our non-interaction with this debate that's going on. So I think we really are ourselves expressing the imbalance that exists in our communities. And therefore, the other thing that I was thinking about was this whole debate about productivity. Productivity in terms of economic indicators that we've all been listening to these past months and weeks and now days as it's getting down to the wire of the presidential campaign. And I was wondering why I'm not productive. I mean, my product is health of northern Wisconsin's peace and justice system. My product is concerns for the environment. My product as a businessman, tourism-related business in northern Wisconsin, is some kind of sustainable economy in which I fit without guilt into. And so my productivity is really in a shambles. I've accumulated some particular skills, and in that process I'm able to produce some products, but in a relatively narrow market. I mean, this room may be the market, you know? In other words, I think I can sell you folks a pretty good line. However, when I go out into the larger markets, that line is not selling real well. And so I really need to question my own sense of balance and my own focus in terms of both the message that I'm selling, the methods that I'm selling that message in, and also what is impacting the way in which I'm ineffective. Now, there are different ways to measure whether we're effective or not, and I would say that the war in the Persian Gulf demonstrates how ineffective the peace movement really is. That it really wasn't the success of some right-wing fanatics convincing 91% of the American public that this is the best thing that we should do. That it really represents the failure of the peacemakers since the 1960s to effectively come up with a meaningful strategy to maintain the appropriate debates within our communities so that the Madison Avenue and Wall Street people couldn't sweep us as they did during during the debates into supporting this war, while those of you in this room, maybe 91% of you didn't support that war, those of you in this room, but you're, believe me, a weird group compared to your cousins and your uncles and your aunties and your grandmas and your grandpas. Very weird, actually. I mean, you're that 9% of everything. And so I think we, in terms of strategies, I really believe that fundamental changes, which I have really no answers for, need to be brought onto the table as well as those tried and true strategies. Those that work, which gain media attention, which affect legislators, which public hearing processes provide a forum for. I'm not saying set those aside. I think that needs to happen also. However, I think we need to go far beyond that, and I think that's the challenge that we face today, both in terms of impacting the next proposed developments and the current development that's going on at Ladysmith, but also in that very long-term seventh generation view. Now, the seventh generation requires not a Walt Bresette or a Ross Perot or a Tom Olson. It requires someone whose ego is really not at stake in order to be able to look far down the road. So that's a whole different kind of leadership, I think. And what we're talking about there is not reform of the Department of Natural Resources or Spencer Black or any of the other characters who are currently on a daily basis managing the development of this region. It calls not for reform but for fundamental change. And I think that strategy for fundamental change is significantly different and at this point unknown on how to achieve it. But if we don't achieve it, I think the reform dance that we're engaged in and that we will always be engaged in because our egos are involved in it and our egos are good, but they need food. And food or microphones. I haven't met one I didn't like. But that's, I think, different significantly than the real change, which is probably going to come without us, and it's less a matter of saying how do we prepare for the seventh generation, how do we prepare our children for the seventh generation, but how do we prepare for the change that's going to occur? So we need visionaries, I think, in order to adequately design the strategies which will emerge as the second, third, and fourth, and fifth generation awaits the second coming of the seventh generation. We need, I think, visionaries, and visionaries, again, I think, are quite egoless people, which is to say that they're not really concerned about whether they get invited to speak at this fine gathering or that fine gathering, but they're doing the necessary work. And so as you sit down today and tomorrow, let me add that confusion to the already confused world we're in, that I think we really need to think in terms of these two tracks of strategies. I don't mean to in any way diminish what's going on in Ladysmith and what's going to happen at Lynne and Exxon and all of those. It's a different track, I think. And what that will require is almost the opposite of the other, which is to say we really need need people who love microphones. We really need people who understand technology. We really need people who are not only brave and strong and articulate, but we need more of them. And so I think that's part of the strategy is to, for those of us who are concerned about reform, and I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Kakkak and Exxon. We're really not talking about change, because if we were talking about change, I think our methods would be just absolutely significantly different. We are talking about reform, reforming the DNR, reforming the legislature, reforming the town boards, reforming those who are currently, from our perspective, making the decisions which we don't like. You know, we don't want to burn down the courthouse. I haven't heard that except from a small quarter of this group of folks. If that's the case, then really what we are talking about, I think, is reform. And so I put that forward in terms of the strategies that we're talking about. Now, there is that small quarter of folks out there who are neither talking about change, nor are they talking about reform. They're just really pissed off. They're just really frustrated. I mean, they just got no place to turn. And I think that I've been there myself, and fortunately I can get back in there periodically, and I get back out of there periodically also. But we need to somehow, I think, accommodate that rage and anger. Not change it, accommodate that rage and anger. With the understanding that it's part of who we are. And to the extent I think that we can use it, suggest ways in which to use that, I think we really need to do that. There's an interesting proposal emerging around a group of people, primarily in the Earth First movement. I met one of the folks this week who's been doing a international study of the Earth First movement. And we had dinner, and it's part of a larger group. And he outlined the proposal, which is really quite unique, I think. And that is to create large tracts of wilderness with buffers for the region. And if I think we look at that unto itself, I think it's a wonderful proposal. However, I think that it's quite myopic at the same time, because what it does, at least as I understood it, and granted it was a very short presentation, and not even a presentation, more a dinner conversation, but as I understood it, it prohibited people from being part of the biological mix. And so I think on one hand we need to, basically engage the passion of those who so desperately believe that, while at the same time participate in the discussion, so that when I asked him the question, well, where do the Chippewa fit into this grand wilderness area? And he said, and he prefaced his comments by saying that, well, what we want to do is try and recapture kind of a pre-contact, pre-colonial atmosphere. And I said, well, we were here. We were here. And I didn't really mean at all to challenge his theory, but I wanted to somehow remind him that those of us who are equally concerned about the environment have different skills and resources to bring to the council table. And if we can all maybe someday sit down before Walter runs off and starts the Lake Superior Green Party and somebody else runs off and starts some other group, maybe we could sit down and say, in the next 10 years or in the next 20 years, however long that time frame is, it's, for me, I'm 45 years old, it's the next 15 years. I mean, after that, you're on your own. Forget it. There's too many bright younger people who I'm blocking by being here. That really needs to add to the mix. And if I'm lucky to survive the next 15 years, I put in my time. Hell with it. It's time to be a grandpa. It's time to do what old people do, which is tell stories and whatever it is that do. I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that I will feel like I will have, put in my time, and now, I won't need to run off someplace. People might run to me, and I'll be able to tell them a story. And if I tell good stories, maybe they'll bring me some firewood when I need it, So, those are the thoughts I've been having in terms of what I could bring to this discussion. Now I have some specific proposals, which I'll hopefully contribute in the smaller groups as we do breakouts. But I think that the whole notion of context needs to be, we always need to remind ourselves of this context. I mean, it was tremendously exciting this month to see Roberta Menchu being honored as the Nobel Peace Prize winner, this young Native woman. Because what it did, I think, is beyond anything else, it elevated the Native struggle to a real significant global awareness. And now Native people, I think, have a responsibility to follow up on, well, why is that important? And what then now can we bring that Roberta had talked about in her work in South and Central America, as tragic as it has been. What now can we bring to the struggle? And the question, of course, is what's the struggle? Are we all gathered here to save the Chippewa of northern Wisconsin? Is that why we're here? Are we gathered here to save the fish in the Flambeau River? What is the struggle? I think that's the challenge we always need to ask ourselves. And if it's, Eric Van Lennep was at a recent gathering. Eric works with a group called Arctic to Amazonia, and he's been working on James Bay issues, been working with the Kayapo on rainforest issues, and working with the Chippewa in between. And he has on the t-shirt that he sells, we all sell t-shirts, that if it says, if you come here to help me, go home. If you come here to help yourself, welcome. I think we all, really need to see that the struggle is really a struggle for our own self-worth. As I was coming down, for example, I was trying to replay some of the old spearfishing tapes. in my mind. And some of those were really insane. I was thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, we could have gotten killed out there. Wow. Others, were healing. They brought people together, but it was in that period of the most insane confusion, and it was in the confusion where the real fear exists. We know what Schwarzkopf would have done. We know, they're all predictable people. But it's when you're dealing with unpredictability that fear really rises from me, because then I don't know what anyone is going to do. I didn't even know if I was going to go crazy in the midst of the chaos. Try to hang on to myself real hard, because I was so imbalanced. Geez, what if I just go nuts here, and do something really weird? I don't know if that went through anyone else's mind, but it was a pretty intense time, and so it's when I was playing those tapes back, it reminded me one more time, I think, of the necessity of trying to hang on to that balance. And I don't know that we can balance the DNR first, in terms of a strategy. Well, if we just get the DNR balanced, the world will be balanced. Well, we balance the DNR. Well, if we just balance the legislature, then everything will be fine. And of course, if that doesn't work, we can balance the Congress. And if we don't balance the Congress, maybe we could have Bill and George be co-presidents. Maybe that's. It's always out there. It's always somebody else. Who's the problem? Now, mind you, they're real pains in the ass. Real pains in the ass, and some people are really quite evil. But I think we can sort that out. But I think the only way we can sort that out is that with that internal balance. And I think with that internal balance, with that view of when we see the chaos at the boat landings or in the inner cities or in Wall Street, when we see that, what we see first is ourselves. What we see first is our own inabilities to effectively stop the Persian Gulf War. Not to blame George. That's George's job. That's what he's there for, is to press those buttons. It's our job to keep peace. It's our job, as we sit in this relatively interesting, aesthetically questionable place, whether we as scientists have failed in our duties. How can we as scientists go home at night knowing that what's going on the Flambeau River is going on? One of two things is happening here. Either the science is wrong, the science of which brings us together, or we've all really capitulated in our professions. We've lost the passion and the love of our professions. And we're producing massive amounts of scientists out of institutions who are standing by, just standing by. while this goes on. At the same time, we'll put a doctor behind L, and we'll look for a friendly lawyer, and we want to legitimize our own passions by all of these piled high and deeper people, and more of the same people, and so we're shoring up the very institutions which is sitting idly by while this environment is degrading. So I think that additionally, it really wasn't Carol Bresette, it really isn't Tony Earl, probably not even Tommy Thompson to blame for the mine that's going on in Ladysmith. It's probably those who create institutions like this, Treehaven, who on one hand make us feel good, while on the other hand allow the kind of ecological debate to divert us from really coming to an honest solution on the question of mines or any kind of industrial development in northern Wisconsin. I think that only picking on the obvious, I think, is too easy. We really need to challenge the institutions themselves who create the George Bushes and the Tommy Thompsons and the Tony Earls and the Spencer Blacks and the Dave Obies. I wish I had a list. I'd read them all. I'd read them all up. And so I think that's the challenge too. But let me finish my story. As I was driving down, and as I was wondering what the hell those people from Flambeau were doing out there, those boat landings with these mobs and throngs of people trying to keep them off. It was really a surreal scene, a bizarre, absolutely bizarre scene. And I remember one or two conversations at that time in which I was doubtful myself whether we should continue because of the danger and the confusion. And I think others also. Yet there was this almost gut reaction that continuing was the only thing to do in the face of this madness. And of course it was the absolutely correct thing to do. But as we witness what's going on in Oregon right now, with this campaign against gay and lesbian people, I see the absolute same thing that went on the boat landings in northern Wisconsin. I see absolutely no difference with what's going on with the physical threats and assaults against these folks. And I try to imagine gay friends of mine, lesbian friends of mine living in Oregon, or thinking of going to Oregon. Saying, well, are we going to go out tonight? It's the same scenario. No, let's not go to the parade. It's just too dangerous. It's just too much happening. Maybe we really should back off. Maybe we really shouldn't participate in the gay pride parade. It's just going to piss them off, That's what's going to happen. Maybe I shouldn't come out. Maybe I shouldn't exercise my treaty rights. When you start thinking in those terms, it all becomes interchangeable. All becomes interchangeable. So let me end by asking the question, is this really about mining in northern Wisconsin? And I don't think it is at all. I really don't. Now, mining is just like spearfishing, which is to say it brings out the issues. The question is, what really is the issue? What's wrong with our community, in our communities of northern Wisconsin, that we would so easily capitulate to these large interests? Now, those folks in Ladysmith, and those folks in Tomahawk, and those folks in Mole Lake and Crandon are no different than you and I at all. You know, they might even be smarter than us. They're not willing to risk their lives. No different than gay and lesbian people, no different than anyone else who has stood up and fought for their rights. Except maybe, you know, maybe somebody's put a gun to their head or something. And we're making judgments. They don't kill themselves. The issue is economics. The issue is imbalance. And I think that the only solution that we will be able to achieve for the long term will be a solution which allows for those folks to be, allows for some kind of sustainable economy. And so that's what I would encourage you in your discussions today, tomorrow, is to consider whether any of those folks are really pro-mining at all. But maybe looking for jobs, looking for something else. If the mine's the only thing there, maybe that's the only choice. Maybe we could offer them alternative choices as a way of getting them to move from that position. Wouldn't it be great to put the U.W. Stevens Point Center for Endangered Species at the very site that the mine is now at? Wouldn't it be great to bring people from all over the world to study endangered species? And it would be there long after the proposed mine would be out. Long after. And it would employ people if those scientists did their jobs well. So I really think we need to somehow remind each other that we're all related, and that our own fears sometimes keeps us imbalanced, and the fears of those who we portray as enemies maybe keeps them imbalanced also. Finally, I guess, I've been traveling all over the country recent weeks. There was a large gathering at Taos, which I was invited to attend and listen to some, I guess what people would call visionaries there. And all said the land is the issue. Talking about native rights, the land. I'll be going up to White Earth, meeting with a group who are trying to reclaim the land up there. And what I need to tell you, I guess, is that despite the contradictions that frustrate us all the time, and particularly those which you view from the outside looking at Native people, there are very exciting things going on. And I think that we really need new and different ways beyond the tried and proven ways. In addition to those, we need those to really affect the kind of change that we need. The Earth doesn't need it. Doesn't need it. It's going to be happy when we're all gone. Yes. So we need to really become honest about that also. Earth will be real happy when we're gone. And as the Kakkak said in the mountaintops of the Colombian nation. We need to change. And if we do, things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. So if we really care about our children, not my children, you caring about mine, if you really care about your children, you need to see that child as a mom and as a grandma. And you need to somehow hold that great, 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 great grandchild in your arms today. And you need to be able to do that. And really understand that while this fight is fun for us, that's really what the struggle is all about. And you need to somehow come to terms with those grandchildren, way down the road. Because if you don't come to terms with those grandchildren way down the road, they won't be. Frank Montano, my friend, my flute playing friend, said we are our grandparents' dreams. They had a dream. They made passionate love. Can you imagine them? Making love. And out of that incredible moment of passion and kissing and intercourse, touching, feeling, we come. Thank you.
Shortly after I graduated from law school, and the first thing that came across my desk was hydro relicensing. And I started to go to movies, meetings and catch up on what it meant to relicense a dam, and meeting with the DNR, and oh, I hated this job. These FERC relicensing packages, each one weighs about 50 pounds. It's like it's information meant to disinform a person. They give you so much paper that there's no way you can read it, and there's nothing you can do, and you just want to shove it aside. But I was new, and I tried to read it, and I started to go to these meetings, and one of them was on the Flambeau paper dam projects. They've got 4 projects, and I called up the Wisconsin DNR, and I said, I really don't know what I'm doing, and I need some help. And what do you think are the major priorities? And the people at the DNR who were working on these projects said, Flambeau papers. These people are terrible. They are the worst people in the country. They're just awful. All right, I'll be there. This is a good thing to learn about. So I was listening, and all the science is going over my head, and I'm trying really hard to understand the issues. One of the things that got brought up by a DNR official is what is Flambeau Papers going to do about protecting indigenous mussels? Well, I didn't know anything about indigenous mussels, but it was really interesting to see this DNR diver, endangered species specialist, talking really fervently about mussels. He loved mussels, and these people were killing them. Flambeau papers, by their effluent. And he said, what are you going to do about this? There has to be some kind of cleanup. These mussels have to be in a pristine environment. These mussels need host fish. The host fish might be the gilt darter. The gilt darter is endangered. You've endangered the gilt darter. By endangering the gilt darter, you're endangering possibly the purple wartyback. We don't know for sure if the host fish to the purple wartyback is the gilt darter because science isn't that evolved. But there was this great talk between these DNR people and the Flambeau paper people, and I'm just sitting there taking notes, and the guy at Flambeau Papers, his name is Ed Cruel. And it's just perfect. He was so cute in that super oil can Harry villain way. He said, why do we even care about these endangered species? Species come and species go. They're on the way out. And my eyes are like this. Species come and species go. And the DNR people are just like, oh, what's with this guy? And that's the first time I heard about these mussels. And I kind of made friends with these DNR fur people, and I was talking to them. And a few weeks later, I got a call from an anonymous source within the DNR, and he started talking about the mine. And he said that he had heard that I was real interested in the endangered species, just kind of as a layperson biologist. It's much more interesting than the law. So he said, I have some information that shows that the DNR knew about these endangered species, knew particularly about the purple wartyback, before the draft environmental impact statement was completed. Oh, that's bad. And I was real new. It was like my second, third week on the job. And I said, can you fax that to me? He told me about internal memos. And he kind of hemmed and hawed. He wanted me to just take these notes down. I let him know this isn't going to be enough. I have to have the memos. And he faxed these memos, and they were real smoking guns insofar as the DNR being forthright in its compilation of the draft environmental impact statement and the final environmental impact statement. They made it real clear that DNR staff people recommended surveys be done for these animals, and those staff recommendations were ignored. They were ignored, later correspondence proved, because the draft environmental impact statement was almost completed, and it was a judgment call not to revisit these issues, that the effluent from the mine would not damage anything, that they had done bioassays, and the most sensitive creatures, according to these bioassays, would be protected. So that meant that the purple wartyback and the dragonflies and the fish would be protected. Well, there was a real kind of internal war going on between the staff people at DNR and the administrative people. And a lot of those folks were real helpful, giving Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission and Larry Leventhal's office and Sierra Club the information that we needed to proceed with the case. Now, I work with Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. We represent 13 bands of Lake Superior Chippewa throughout the 3 states, but we don't litigate. I can't go out and, they're not funded for litigation. All I can do is provide information and let people know these are options, and if you want to litigate, here's a theory through which you can litigate. And at this time, when I first got these memos, I understood that there had been a contested case hearing, and that people were really cranked up about this mine. And I knew that, a lot of you people here had been working for many, many years trying to stop it. So I got a hold of Sierra Club, and I gave them the information, and I got a hold of LCO, and I gave them the information, and they both decided to run with it. And you all know what happened, and they ran with it as fast and as far as they could up to this point. And I think those cases did a lot of good. They did a lot of good for me. I learned about Cycloneus tuberculata. And this is Siphius, the bullhead mussel, B. Siphius. And I wanted to pass these around to all of you people because I know that if you ever saw them, you didn't know what they were, and you might not ever get a chance to see them. Now that you know what they are.
Are those the ones that divers found, the sacrificial clams?
These are the ones, these were found in the Flambeau River. And they're really, I just kind of get goosebumps. I got into this so much. We've got purple warty back. This was found in the river. When they're fresh, when they're new, it is very purple in the inside. They're very, very purple. And these are the precious things, and I'd like you all to just look at them and check them out. That's the bullhead. That's the purple warty back.
I think I should interrupt you, because it was Evelyn and me that planted those in the river. You people have a lot of time this afternoon, I'll read the story of how we did it. We got goosebumps too, but I appreciate what you helped.
Oh, now this is one that's been coated with like a shellac. You can see the purple in this. What a beautiful thing it is. Now I want these back, you guys. And these, you might not find them so beautiful, but they're equally awe-inspiring. Ophiogynthus howi. This is the exuve from a dragonfly that evolved in the age of dinosaurs. This is an old species. These species are important, I learned from DNR people, because they can only live in really clean places underneath waterfalls, underneath in the substrate. When they're in this form, they're like they're little bugs, and they live under the water, fast-moving, very clean, highly aerated waters. Same as the purple wartyback, same as the bullhead clam. They have to have clean water. So when these fellows die out from an indigenous water, it means that something has happened to the water, that they can't live there anymore, that the water's been degraded. They're bioindicators of a certain type of water that is disappearing, just like these animals are disappearing. I had heard, after I learned about these things, I just got so interested in the biology, and I had heard a story about the dragonfly from the Sioux. And most all you probably know about the bear. The bear is a protecting spirit for many different Indian peoples. Well, the Sioux people have a story that the dragonfly is a protecting spirit in the animal world, in the insect kingdom. And if you think about the behavior of dragonflies, they patrol, go up and down, up and down. And there's something kind of menacing about them. I know that when we were kids, we'd call them sewing bugs. And if you left your window open and you slept at night, a sewing bug might stitch your eyes shut. I'm kind of afraid of them. Protecting spirits protect the waters from evil spirits. And that's kind of like what happened in this case. We might lose them, but we learned what they were for. We didn't lose them altogether. Like when a relative dies or a friend dies, if they die, you still have a lot of memory. You never really lose that person. This is Ophiogophus howi. That's called the exuviae. They bust out of these things and take wing. And it happens. So yeah, like a little shell, like they metamorphosize. This one is really interesting. I don't know if you heard the story about, this is the dragonfly that hasn't been found anywhere except in the Flambeau River and the St. Croix River. It had no name. And I got to be friends with some of these DNR people, and they felt real bad about what happened. And I told them about the Sioux story that I had learned. And they said they'd like to name this dragonfly a Lakota word. And they asked me, what's the Lakota word for dragonfly? And I got a dictionary and I looked it up, and it is suspecha. So now this is scientifically named Ophiogophus suspecha. They didn't want to know the Chippewa name. Maybe it had to do with the Sioux, I don't know. So that was the first major thing that I dealt with as a policy analyst for the Lake Superior Chippewa, working with Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. Some of the other things I've been working on are the benzene spill up in Superior, outstanding resource waters, and the Noranda mine on the Willow Flowage, White Pine Copper Range smelter, variety of major issues. And everywhere I turn around, I see an opportunity to really learn a lot. I don't know how much I can do as an attorney working for an organization. Whatever I do, I have to get directed to do by the people. But I think about this job kind of personally, and it's really fun to learn about this thing and to realize all the little intricate pieces that can be manipulated. And maybe it's all just for our fun. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer them. And I think that as far as the Ladysmith lawsuit is concerned, we really were able to inform a lot of people, and that was a plus. And the effluent limits were changed, and that was a plus. Wisconsin DNR got a black eye, and that was a plus. They deserved it, and I think that was good. I think that they're going to try to redeem themselves, and we saw that real clearly. I know a number of you were present in Madison a few days ago, and I think you heard Mr. Bresette pop off really vehemently about this outstanding resource water, and he was really attacking the mining companies, and I think that some of the work that we've been able to do has maybe shamed them. So I hope so. Yes?
How is the wild rice doing in the Bad River area? Did they have a good season?
I think they had a good season, and from what Bad River people tell me, that's the best rice in the whole world. They always have a good season. Their rice is good stuff. They do well.
I was wondering if the water in that area was being polluted enough to affect the mine.
No, not that I hear. In fact, the Bad River sloughs and the Kakkak sloughs were designated as proposed to be outstanding resource waters. The state of Wisconsin wants to offer them the ultimate in anti-degradation protection because of their pristine quality, just to supplement the efforts that the Bad River people are already doing. And those waters are fabulous. And also Bad River and other tribes are looking at their own water quality standards, their own water quality criteria for on-reservation. And now, if they do this, federally recognized Indian tribes can have higher standards than the state or federal government. And the federal government is obligated through the Clean Water Act to enforce those higher standards. So that's something that the tribes are seriously looking at for on-reservation waters. Okay.
I have a question for you, Robin. Is that the case in any state in the country where a state law level is actually higher than the federal? And is that implemented anywhere?
As long as it's a higher standard.
Is it in practice anywhere at the time that you're aware of?
It is in practice. It's been, the states have been doing it for quite a while, and there is, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but there's some people out west that have been working and implementing their own clean water standards.
Are any Wisconsin standards at all exceeding federal at this time?
Not that I know of, but I'm not real up to speed on that. Most of what I do is the mining stuff.
We'll take more questions for all the panelists at the end of this panel. I want to introduce Roscoe and Evelyn Churchill, if they need any introduction whatsoever, for the few that don't know them. They were instrumental in getting opposition started to the Ladysmith mine. Their farm is about 3 miles from the Flambeau River, from the mine site. They have traveled all over the continent in the US and Canada to mine sites to find out firsthand for themselves what Kakkak and Rio Tinto Zinc and other mining companies have been doing. Roscoe, of course, served on the Rusk County Board as a supervisor and has traveled all over the state to meet with legislators and organizations. Evelyn has been spending long hours researching mining laws and rules, writing position papers. If you see anything from the Rusk County Citizens Action Group, you can kind of do a grammatical analysis and find out that they were probably all written by Evelyn Churchill. So, wanted to introduce both of them, however they want to handle it.
Well, thank you, everybody. Whether that was a really good statement he made there at the end or not, I'm not too sure about me being involved in all of this. Well, thank you for asking me to appear today. I'm very happy to see all of you. I know you are all caring people, very caring people, or you wouldn't be here. Now, I wish I could come to you today with good tidings and bright new ideas of how to stop these mining giants. But after experiencing the past 5 years of the downfall of our largely anti-mining community, and now watching the continuing assault of the environment on the banks of the Flambeau, I'm sort of without any really encouraging words. If I hadn't been through it, I'd find it hard to believe that what's happened in Ladysmith could happen in Wisconsin. Mr. Mercando was hired by Kakkak in 1987 to subdue our community and get control of our local municipalities and to gain unhampered exploitation privileges with the state agencies. And he accomplished his mission, but in a most unscrupulous and expedient manner. But even more unsettling is the fact that Mr. Mercando was supported and aided all the way by our heads of the state, some local money-hungry individuals, the state agency, and a whole legal force. Something's very wrong in our world today that evil should be allowed to overcome the good in this manner. It can be said that Rusk County is now a full-fledged colony of Rio Tinto zinc. That's the big British mining company that bought up all of Kennecott's properties all around the world. And whether it's possible to rescue Rusk County before mining actually starts, only time can tell. Maybe some miracle will appear. But nevertheless, we can't quit. We have to remember the old saying that often it is darkest before dawn. So that'll keep us going, hopefully. As most of you are already aware, the mining companies played a major role in the drafting and passage of the mining laws and rules of Wisconsin. Fundamentally, and even the DNR admits this, the laws and rules are set up purposely to facilitate mining. In fact, they give the companies freewheeling with little responsibility for the tremendous costs of the environmental damages caused by sulfide mining, or for the degradation of the local communities, political, societal, and economic structures, and for the erosion of their democratic rights that the mining company causes. I don't have time to go into detail on these, but we'll say a few words about the rules for groundwater standards for mining waste because it is of such basic importance. I think as I look over the crowd that most of you are probably well acquainted with the information I'm going to tell you, but just in case there are some that would like to hear it, I'll go ahead. These rules are called, or administration rules, for mining waste. They're called NR 182.075. And these rules were hailed as a protection for the groundwater, but they are nothing of the sort. They are rules that simply are a means to accommodate and allow legally the severe acid and heavy metal pollution that is generated from the mining of sulfide ore bodies. All three, the Kennecott, Noranda, and Exxon ore bodies, contain massive sulfide ores, and these are the worst for severe toxic pollution and harmful and poisonous to those who drink the water so polluted, and they cause major fish kills. There are no standards regulating the groundwater quality within the waste area and for 1,200 feet beyond the perimeter of the waste and mining sites. The only requirement being that the pollution will not exceed the federal drinking water standards at the boundary of that area. I don't know how well you can all see, but I hope to some degree. The rules set up what is called a compliance boundary. In this case, this is the Kennecott mine, and we have the two waste areas and the pit here, and this is the Flambeau River. Well, within this line, there are no regulations, no standards. It is legal to pollute to whatever degree, as long as it doesn't exceed the federal drinking water standards at this line out here, which is 1,200 feet from the perimeter of this. In fact, this area where there are no regulations for the groundwater quality is about 3 times as great as the total disturbed area for the mining itself, which was 181 acres. And this is approximately 500 or a little over. So during mining, there probably wouldn't be too much of a problem because the groundwater will naturally flow towards the pit because continual pumping has to go on to keep it dry enough to work in. Therefore, your groundwater is more or less going to go into the pit. However, after mining ceases and the company's long gone and the aquifers refill with the seepage from the toxic waste, the big pollution problems may begin to show up and continue forevermore. I want to mention also that these wastes will be shoved back into the pit without any lining. Also, the sludge from the water treatment plant itself will be shoved back in. And they tell us that isn't going to harm us or harm the water. So then, if that isn't enough of an accommodation, the company can get variances less restrictive granted by the DNR. Well, 9 persons from Ladysmith have challenged these rules and have formally petitioned for repeal of NR 182.075 and are requesting rules that prohibit the discharge of heavy metals into the groundwater from mining waste. The DNR has informed them that it will take 2 months for them to come to a decision on the petition. And we do hope that we get strong support on this effort from the environmental groups around the state. If they deny our petition, we do have the option of a judicial review of the DNR decision. When it comes down to the real nitty-gritty, what we as a people are up against is not just whether mining should go ahead or not. What we are really contending with is much more involved. We are contending with the control of our lives by the powerful multinational corporations, in other words, foreign powers. The very beginning of our country is a history of oppression by a foreign power, the British, and it became so intolerable that the founders of our country declared their independence from this foreign power. They did it knowing that they might even hang for it, yet they treasured it that much. And that is what this mining issue is all about. Oppression by foreign powers. So they can steal our natural resources, including the groundwaters, rivers, and streams, and breaking down our democratic setup and superseding it with corporation totalitarianism. Are we just going to let them continue until it's too late? Some of us have already put together our own Declaration of Independence from corporation oppression and destruction, copied after the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And it is supported initially by the Rusk County Citizens Action Group and the Wisconsin Greens. So far, it is simply symbolic, but it could be a good vehicle for the gathering of our forces and, who knows, maybe even be a beginning of a fundamental change. We welcome all to join in its support. I have it back on the back table right back there. And if you would like to, you can look it over. And if you would like to join us in support of it, there's a pad where you can put that, on which you can put your name or that of your organization. On the same table back there, there is a pile of this little newsletter called Forest Voice. And that's put out by a group hoping to save the forests of the West, which is a very urgent thing at the moment. But as urgent as that action is, I hope you can do whatever possible on that too, if you have the time. That's not the sole reason for having that paper on the back table back there. The real reason for my putting it back there is that it's full of great ideas for grassroots actions that are just as applicable to our struggles with the mining issue as for the forest issue. So when you find it convenient, pick up a copy and go through and be inspired, because they really do have some good ideas. Then one more point. I know last year, after all your efforts and overwhelming turnout in favor of Assembly Bill 81, which called for a moratorium on mining, its dying in committee was a terrible blow to all of us. However, Harvey Stour, the one who introduced it, tells us that he'll be bringing it back again for another try this coming legislative session. And that's great. We hear that there are, and I heard this from a legislator, that there have been some real turnarounds in the legislators concerning the mining issue, which is very encouraging. So once again, let's give it our best. A legislative moratorium on all mining in the state would stop the Kakkak project in its tracks. I know that's sort of a, what should I say, pie in the sky idea at the moment with our present heads of state, but isn't it worth trying? So I thank you all.
About 2 weeks
weeks ago, Evelyn and I were traveling by train through the eastern part of our country, and we, one of the places we stopped was at, in Virginia, where George Mason penned the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And it was from this that our Bill of Rights eventually came. And these were the people that had the guts to stand up to Great Britain over 200 years ago and say we've had enough. These are the things we believe are important. And I read to the DNR the other day that it says in Article 2 that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people. The magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. And we've got to make our legislators, our people that get elected, remember those things. Well, I'm on my own, because I'm past the 15 plus 45. And I can tell you, it's stressful when two old dandelions like Evelyn and me try to work out something that we can bring to you people that will have some meaning for you. When we left Ladysmith a few hours ago, the land of opportunity for mining companies, that is, we know that there's a railroad been built across the Highway 27 that I crossed yesterday, a spur that will allow a foreign mining company by our state highway department to build a railroad so that they could haul the copper and gold that have been buried there from all time, take it out, ship it out of the state, over a state subsidized railroad to the Lord knows where, because they haven't told us where it's going yet. And for this privilege, the area that I live in, Rusk County, if it's lucky, will get approximately 1% of the value of the ore that will be taken out to be paid back into the Rusk County area. So most it would be maybe, for the life of the mine, $4 million for about $400 million worth of ore. When I write my speech, or write my talk, and then I listen to guys like Walt and different ones, they just mess it all up because it has to start changing. And I thought about the prayer this morning too, talking about the 7th generation. My grandchildren will be the 7th generation of a family that has lived in Wisconsin since 1847, near Viroqua. I wish I had the courage of a fellow like John LaForge, because I get so tall, man, to think that I have to sit and wait around for something to happen that ought to happen violently and at once, because we are being overridden by violence. I've lived nearly all my life in the Ladysmith area, and it was a pretty nice community to live in, but it's not anymore. Let me tell you what it's like to live in an area where mining is going to be a fact, or can be a fact. When the mining representatives come into an area, and you've already felt that in the Exxon deal over at Crandon, and you've already felt it in the Noranda project on the River Watershed. The first thing they do is look for the influential people and those that are well-heeled and buddy up to them. We saw it happen in Ladysmith back in about 1970 is when this was going on. I can tell you just what it was like. First of all, they joined the right churches, the churches with the most influential people, always. Then they join the Kiwanis and the Lions Club because they're going to get to the businessmen and they're the easiest ones to persuade to follow them. Then they get to the local governments, and the local governments I remember was the school superintendent under whom I was working at that time, the highway commissioner, any official that's in the county or town that they could get to and persuade them what a good thing this was going to be. Then they make their little gifts to the hospital, $100 to buy some needles or something. To the library to buy some books for the little kiddies. Maybe $200 even. But that's the kind of gifts that they spread around and people think, my goodness, this is a good outfit. Then they get control of the newspaper. And how do I know that? Because they did it in Ladysmith. They got such control by their ads and the materials they put in the paper that at one stretch of the time, the Ladysmith News would not publish a letter about mining written by an ordinary citizen. That's the kind of power that they have, and the Ladysmith News is still so pro-mine, makes you sick. They learn who the decision makers are, and they get to those people, and they really play up to them. And when they run into opposition, they have a public relations firm such as Kakkak has hired the Wood Corporation, or whatever it's called, communication, in Madison, to do their dirty work of publishing their stories to undermine anyone who would have the audacity to come up and say, this is not a good project. We have just heard, and yesterday we sent out, Evelyn and I sent out a video to a lawyer in Madison, that this firm in Madison is making contributions to Linda Liebert, who is the mining representative under the Republican ticket, but she's sponsored by the mining company. And she's spending money like crazy. And she said the mining company didn't give her the money. Well, we found out why. The mining company is giving their money to the Wood Communications in Madison, and they are donating it to Linda Liebert to put her signs up here. So don't tell me that they don't know how to play this game. And I can tell you personally that when I was working for the school system, I was an elementary supervising principal I taught in Ladysmith altogether nearly 30 years. And this was near the end of the time when I was getting ready to retire. They interfered with my job at least 5 times, where they canceled reservations that I had, or told things that I could prove weren't true, until I finally threatened them. I had met a lawyer in Madison, some of you might know Frank Schorkheimer, and he said, this is interfering with your personal life and you have a case here. And when I told the superintendent and the school board if they interfered we would go to court, then the mining company backed off. That was the end of it. But they were trying to scare me out and make me shut up. That's pretty hard to do, my wife will tell you that. The ladies in this community is not a nice place to live anymore. Old friends are no longer talking to some of their old friends. People that I live close to barely speak to us anymore because we had the guts to come out and say we didn't like what was going on. Why they took the stand that they took, I don't know. But the gossip from the mining company continues to be spread in the Ladysmith News every single issue with a little filler that comes out and tells what a wonderful thing this mine is going to be for everybody. Our community is split with the mining interests and their cohorts spreading their propaganda all of the time. And people have become afraid to speak out. And this is true of mining companies all over. So often, and I could name these people that come to Evelyn and me and say, or call us on the phone and say, we're so glad you're fighting on this mining thing. And I surely don't want that mine. But I just don't dare to speak out. Well, that's not a heck of a lot of help. It might make you feel good to think they aren't against you, but it sure as heck doesn't help if you win your cause when you're needing it. Some of them are afraid they'll lose their job. afraid their reputation will be sullied, or afraid of losing their friends, and I've lost friends. But I'm gonna tell you something. I value the friends that I have gained, that Evelyn and I have gained, since we got into this, over the state, much more than I value any of those that I've lost. Because you are the ones that have a dream. You have a purpose in life. You're doing something that's going to be good for the seventh generation. And I'm sure happy about that. I watched the Rusk County Board deteriorate. I saw a purge of our board where 12 of our members were knocked out of 21 in one election because of letters that were passed out. I happened to get onto that, back on the board that time by 4 votes, because they had mailed letters out to tell us what a bad bunch of people we were. 12 got knocked off. We had a new board. And that was the board that was in power when the local agreement was signed in Rusk County. And they either were people who had no understanding at all of what was going on, or they were in there because they did know what they could do and to get this thing on the road. And the town board, town grant, is a disaster. The people that are in that board are not going to do anything to help protect our area at all. And this is all because Kakkak's man, Mercando, came in there. Why do I tell you all this? Well, I tell you this because we're still a little bit ahead. You're ahead in the area around the Willow Flowage. And I agree with Robin that we saw a crack in the DNR last week. We saw a change. I guess it was this week, wasn't it?
It was this week, yeah.
This week. Time goes fast. I don't know if all of you felt it, but I sure felt it, and beside me spoke up several times. But that's the first time I had seen him do this at any meeting.
He's retiring.
Right?
He's retiring a month.
Maybe he isn't scared anymore. So you're still ahead on the Noranda, Roosevelt, because you've reached the DNR with some real force, and I saw that the other day. You're ahead because you have the strong support of a lot of groups all over the state who will do everything in their power and everything that they know how to do to help the people save the Willow Flowage. I think this is probably the most powerful group to save the Willow Flowage that there is in the state. I'm honored to be here. And you are still ahead because you have some of the strong, real strong people in the area around the Willow Flowage who haven't been afraid to come out and say your say and take a stand and do something about it. And the only way you can fight the bastards is to take a stand, because they got so much power. They have so much money. They have the toughest kind of lawyers. I sure appreciate you people around the Willow area. You won't have a chance yet because this story is now statewide, and the people of the state and the officials are beginning to listen. You got to sit on those officials, believe me. You have a chance yet because you have seen the power of the foreign corporations and have seen the lengths to which they will go to ride roughshod over the local people. So you will understand what they are doing when they come into your area. And Noranda can say, well, you don't need any outstanding resource waters because we aren't sure that's even legal in the state of Wisconsin. It makes me so mad. I thought maybe I should bring my 357 along. But mostly because you're right in what you're doing. Your fight is the right one. And those slimy snakes have no regard for your lakes, or your rivers, or your landscape, or the air that you breathe. All they want is to get their shovel in the ground, take out the ore, leave the mess, and scram. And they'll do anything to your laws, anything to the people, anything to the community, their way. You know who the enemies are. Of course, it's the multinationals and all of their representatives. And for the Willow Floyd, it's Noranda. For the Crandon area, it's Exxon. And you know the pimps out of Milwaukee, the Wisconsin Manufacturing and Commerce, that are there to shoot their mouths off with no regard to what can happen to our waters in the north. And then you have the ignorant and the greedy officials who get elected to the town and the state and the county and don't have the guts to protect the rights of the people that they represent. After 8 terms on the county board, I've lost a lot of respect for the caliber of a lot of the people that have gotten on the county boards. And the more you mix up with them, the more I think you'll agree with me. And they get control of the media. We saw that in Ladysmith. We saw the Pioneer Press was a magazine that, a newspaper that kept coming out with some things sort of on our side until Kakkak sent its guys over there, talked to the press, and from that time on, we got no more coverage. It was to our benefit from the Pioneer Press. They're going to control the press. They've got the money and the time, and they do it. And then probably another group that they get to are the business people who think they are going to make money out of the project. And all you hear is jobs, jobs. And the money is going to come from the taxes, and that's peanuts. But they're a pretty powerful group. They're the ones that run the Kiwanis and the Lions Club. They're the ones that get their people elected to the city council. So they're going to be the decision makers. So you've got a heck of an uphill business all the way. So I came here today because I wanted to get you so galling mad at what's happening in Wisconsin that you will vow to smash those greedy devils who have invaded our state, and that you'll work to support those lawmakers and those officials who can stop this invasion. I thought we cracked the DNR board just a little bit the other day. We don't dare let up. We got to keep right on, keep the pressure on. I hope you will support our petition with the 9 signers to get a change in the groundwater rules. It's very important. Sandy Lyon, Pastor White, Les Tooth, and I, on the 31st day of July, I believe, 1981, went to Madison to watch the disgrace that took place that day as the DNR accepted AB 182 that Evelyn referred to. The administrative rule that became the beginning for the groundwater laws around our state. And that's the one that allows the pollution inside the compliance boundary with no regulation at all. And only at the compliance boundary does the maximum contaminant level standard take on. There's no group of people I'd rather talk to than you today. We're the ones who can do something about Wisconsin's future. We don't dare to let it get lost. I have some videotapes to show you of what's happening in other parts of the world. I had a video sent to me recently from Nova Scotia from Carolyn Brown, who has been contacting us all summer, where the RTZ, the same mining company that's in Ladysmith, has a tin mine that they have closed, and she sent the pictures, and I would be delighted to show some of you this evening, and if there's a lull when they can, to show what they left there. And if anybody thinks that they're going to leave anything better in Ladysmith, they're dreaming. Because by the time they get through and they scram back to London, who are you going to sue? Kakkak will be long evaporated because it's just a shell company anyway. So I'd like to show you that. And then if some of you really are interested, I'd like to read the story sometime today to those of you who would like to know how Evelyn and I planted the clams in the Flambeau River, so that they would be found by the DNR. I can show you every word that is true. I'd like to answer any questions. I'm here today because I'd like to slay the buzzards. I use buzzards because that's the real word that describes them I can't use here in front of decent people. So,
Sure you can.
Go ahead.
please, join hands with everybody around you. Resolve that we're going to put a stop to this takeover of Wisconsin by the foreign powers. Resolve that we're going to shake up our DNR and our legislative system and our local government. Resolve that we're going to work together and see if we can't save this for the 7th generation.
Roscoe, I don't know if it's in the program, but just for other people's information, there are no firearms allowed at this conference. We're going to go to 12:15. For those who are really hungry, that gives you about 15 minutes or so. We're going to have Gedicks speak, and then hopefully there'll be some time for questions. If you don't get your question asked, you could always ask during lunch too. So sorry, we're a little behind schedule. Gedicks, for those who don't know, is the director of the Center for Alternative Mining Development Policy and the co-founder and executive secretary of the Wisconsin Resources Protection Council. He's a professor of sociology at UW-LaCrosse and has worked with the Molek-Sakagan Chippewa in their battle with Exxon and with the Lacouture in the battle with Kakkak and RTZ. In 1990, he directed and produced the documentary film The New Resource Wars, and in your packet is information on how to get a hold of that. His book on the same topic, the same title, I think, will be published by South End Press next spring. So, Gedicks.
Thank you, Zoltán. What I'd like to do in the short time I have is just give you a sense of how we got to where we are today. Specifically, the intervention of the Lacouture tribe in the Kakkak Rio Tinto zinc mine. And the way we got there was essentially a result of something that happened outside of Wisconsin, outside the United States in the 1960s. It was a revolt of resource colonies in the Third World that eventually resulted in organizations of those countries that have those resources, the oil countries, the copper-producing countries, the bauxite-producing countries, which made an impression on native nations around the world, and particularly in the United States, which also saw themselves in a comparable position as being subject to a colonial power who was exploiting resources, providing very little in the way of economic returns to the communities where those resources were being taken, and realized that if they united, they would have some power to affect the economic conditions on the reservations, as well as the political conditions in terms of gaining more decision-making power over what kinds of developments take place on Indian reservations. So it was in this context of the revolt of the Third World in the 1960s that groups like Americans for Indian Opportunity and the American Indian Movement began having an influence on the ways in which particular tribes saw themselves and their resources. In 1976, I was asked by the Molek-Sakagan Chippewa to assist them in putting together some kind of response to the attempt by the Exxon Corporation to develop a copper-zinc mine next to their reservation. And one of the strategies that became clear from the very beginning was that the land on which Exxon was going to develop that deposit was land that had been historically claimed by the Sakagan Chippewa and was never actually ceded or given to the Chippewa, despite the treaties that they entered into with the United States government. Over and above that was the question of the cultural survival of the tribe, which depends on wild rice, and Fred Ackley is here from the Molek tribe. He'll be talking more about that in the session on Exxon. But very briefly, what it involved was Exxon's willingness to engage in an operation which would guarantee that pollutants from the mine would affect the wild rice lake of the Sakagan Chippewa, and if that wild rice lake was affected, it would affect the entire cultural survival of the tribe. So what we were talking about was essentially ethnic genocide, the destruction of an entire culture based upon wild rice, because the technology of mining, sulfide mining, was such that it could not, despite whatever preventive measures could be developed, could not be prevented. It was an either-or situation. And given that it was a question of survival, we decided on a long-term strategy of marshaling both the technical and the legal arguments to fight the mine, as well as looking at who the main actor was in this aggression, which was the Exxon Corporation, and systematically going about understanding who this corporation was, what its interests in the Crandon copper zinc deposit was, and what its vulnerabilities were. And it is that kind of analysis which provides the only guarantee that people that don't have the kind of resources and don't have the kind of expertise and don't have the kind of political power that corporations do and that state agencies do have any chance whatsoever of either defending their communities or of making some kind of crippling blow against corporations which are much more powerful than any of the communities that we're talking about. And over the course of 10 years, what happened was that through a careful analysis of exactly why Exxon wanted to develop this deposit, what its financial liabilities were, what its political liabilities were, the tribe went about asserting its treaty rights to the land that Exxon was planning to develop as a mine. It asserted its treaty rights on the 1,800 acres of land that was eventually given to the tribe in the 1930s, arguing that any adverse impact of the mining operation on their wild rice lake was a violation of their treaty rights. And they took those cases both to the courts, filing lawsuits, and they also took that case to Exxon shareholders. They went straight to the center of Exxon's power in its board of directors and its shareholders, and told the corporation quite matter-of-factly that we don't give a damn whether you're concerned about treaty rights, but we are going to guarantee that if you ignore those treaty rights, it is going to cost you. It is going to cost you because we're going to tie this project up so long in the federal courts that any investment you make, and we're talking about $1 billion investment that Exxon was planning to make, is going to cost you so much that your shareholders are going to revolt against the corporation, throw out the board of directors, and put in a board of directors that will be responsible to people that want to make a profit, because this is not going to be a profitable enterprise. And over the course of 10 years, it was that kind of argument that not only convinced Exxon shareholders that this was a stupid investment, but it also convinced the vast majority of the people in the local area, in those lake associations, in the various environmental groups, in the various civic groups, that this was an economic disaster as well as an environmental disaster. And that is why Exxon pulled out, not because of depressed metal prices, but because of significant Indian and environmentalist opposition that was premised on the assertion of Chippewa treaty rights. And it was that assertion of treaty rights which then, and only then, explained the determination of the Thompson and the Clouser administration to launch a major assault on those treaty rights by ignoring the violence at the boat landings, by encouraging the anti-Indian and anti-treaty groups like PAR, Protect America's Rights and Resources, Stop Treaty Abuse, to attack those treaty rights without any kind of either state or federal intervention to uphold those rights. Right, so the whole fundamental assault on Chippewa treaty rights is not just over, in fact, it's very, very unlikely that people that really understood the issue ever thought it was about fish in the first place. It was about the ability of those tribes to assert their sovereignty, to assert their inherent governmental powers, to exercise control over what happened on those reservations. And it was that kind of perception on the part of Exxon and on the part of the Thompson administration, particularly James Clouser, who was the chief lobbyist for Exxon, who then became secretary of the administration, and who led the assault on Indian treaty rights, trying to intimidate Mole Lake into signing an agreement, trying to intimidate Lac du Flambeau into signing an agreement that would have given up those rights. All right, so this whole question of mining is not simply an environmental issue, it is fundamentally a treaty rights issue. And as Roscoe and Evelyn pointed out, it is also a fundamental issue of democracy. That in order to accomplish what they want to accomplish, they have to both eliminate democratic process at the local level, make it impossible for people who live in those communities to have any say of what happens to their communities, and they also have to assault treaty rights, because treaty rights are the last legal defense against the invasion of northern Wisconsin by the multinational mining industry. With the defeat of Exxon in 1986, we reached a new stage of resistance to corporate colonization of resources. Because what happened then was that the Rio Tinto Zinc Corporation, which is the world's largest corporation, which has an incredibly bad environmental track record, not to mention a genocidal track record as far as its treatment of native peoples, destroying their lands, pushing traditional peoples off their treaty lands, and contributing pollutants to the waters and the lands of native peoples all around the world, in Canada, in Australia, in South Africa, in Chile, in Panama. Any place where there are resources that Rio Tinto Zinc is interested in, those are the places where native peoples are the first victims of those corporate plans. It is also those places where some of the most fierce resistance to Rio Tinto Zinc has come from. There is now a guerrilla insurgency in Papua New Guinea that has effectively shut down the operation of Rio Tinto Zinc. In Panama, the Catholic bishops, along with the Guayami Indians, have effectively created an atmosphere in Panama where Rio Tinto Zinc finds it unprofitable to develop a major copper mine. And in 1990, Gashkabash, the tribal chairman of Lakudare, went to London to the annual meeting of Rio Tinto Zinc, appeared before the board of directors, and said, are the shareholders of Rio Tinto Zinc going to respect the rights of the Chippewa people in northern Wisconsin? And the response of Rio Tinto Zinc was to shut off Gashkabash's microphone. They did not want to hear what Gashkabash had to say. But the London press, the London Financial Times, which is the bastion of political conservatism in England, ran an editorial the next day saying how outrageous it was for Sir Derek Birkin, who was the chairman, or actually at that point was Sir Alistair Fromm, how outrageous it was for Sir Alistair Fromm to slight the head of a sovereign nation, named like Gashkabash and the Chippewa Nation. And in fact, it was that headline which made the most impression on people that read the paper the next day, not the news that the board of directors wanted to announce, which was that Rio Tinto Zinc had just gotten AAA bond rating from Moody's Investor Services and Standard & Poor Investor Services in New York. So Rio Tinto Zinc did not impress anyone with its outrageous behavior toward Gashkabash. But what did impress people both in the United States and in London was that, once again, Rio Tinto Zinc is running into opposition from native peoples, and that if one looks at the places where Rio Tinto Zinc has failed and lost lots of money, it is precisely those places where native peoples and environmentalists have come together in some kind of coalition to oppose those plans. And it doesn't make any difference whether that coalition comes together before the mine starts or during the operation of the mine. The important point is that there is a consistent level of understanding on the part of those people who are affected by these operations that there are ways in which to intervene in that process. One can stop it before it begins, and that's much easier and much more effective. But one should not despair because a permit has been granted that the fight is over. Because if that had been the case, there'd be a mine already in operation and shipping ore in Ladysmith. Now, there would have been one 10 years ago. All right, so the fact that Lakudare in 1989 intervened in the state permit process very late in the game, and intervened on the basis that the operation of that mine was going to affect their treaty rights, namely their hunting, fishing, and gathering rights in the ceded territory of Wisconsin, that provided the basic mobilization point around which a broad-scale Indian and Environmentalist Alliance came together to oppose that mine. And the fact that the hearing examiner in January of 1991 issued the permit despite all the arguments that that coalition brought together in the summer of 1990 was a major setback, but it was not the end of the story, because 6 months later, as Robin began her story this morning, pointed out, we had a DNR diver who discovered these endangered species. We had people within the DNR who were sensitized enough to the issue to realize the significance of the information that they were sitting on in terms of these internal memos, and leaked those memos. All right, so we don't usually think about the fact that that this whole case of Le Coudray and Sierra Club against Wisconsin was not some kind of planned, strategic attack on the mine. It was more the case that we did all these little things all along the way, educating people in the communities, educating people in the DNR, making an issue of it wherever and whenever we could, so that when those pieces of information became available to people, they had a context to place that information in. And they realized, in the case of the DNR, that they also had a social responsibility to act on that information. And I suggest that had that coalition not been in existence, that would never have happened. So first of all, as soon as the permit was granted, a lot of mainstream environmentalists wrote the project off as a lost cause. Le Coudray, Rusk County Citizens Action Group, and the coalition that came together around that issue in Anishinaabe, Niji, or Friends of the Chippewa, never had that kind of short-run perspective. We always had a long-range perspective that this is a long-term process of colonization, and that there are going to be battles won and battles lost, and that one should not pin one's entire strategy on winning a particular battle, because this is a war. This is a serious war. It involves resources, it involves environment, and it involves democracy. And those are issues which are worth fighting for over a long period of time. And it's a series of issues that has the capability of putting together a coalition of the type that is capable and has demonstrated itself in the past being capable of stopping Exxon Corporation and stopping Rio Tinto Zinc Corporation. And the mine was in operation. Keep in mind here that construction began on that mine in 1991, and it was after construction started that Le Coudray and Sierra Club went into court and got an injunction to stop that for an entire year. Rio Tinto Zinc lost $600 million by that injunction. And after the DNR came out with another phony environmental impact statement on the endangered species, which essentially said that we still haven't done the surveys of the endangered species, but we're pretty confident that whatever species may be out there, that they're not going to be harmed by whatever is going to be dumped into the river. It was that kind of outrageous statement that led to phase 2 of LCO, Sierra Club versus the DNR. And let me tell you that the judge ruled against us on that suit. But we demonstrated something quite powerful to the Department of Natural Resources that they are not going to forget for the next decade. And what that was that when given the opportunity to do so, that this coalition is capable of putting experts on the witness stand before a judge or before a hearing examiner and making mincemeat out of these DNR people who are toadies for the Thompson and Clauser administration, who are willing to subjugate their scientific credentials in order to promote an environmentally destructive project. And anyone who attended those meetings, anyone who attended those hearings, and any of the reporters that actually reported on what happened could not come to any other conclusion. Now, we didn't have the chance to do that in the hearing on the permit process. But if we had had the opportunity to do that, that permit would never have been granted. So we made a clear impression on the DNR, and they know that if it comes to another fight where we have the ability to present our expert witnesses against their expert witnesses, that we are going to win. And I think that is the essential context for understanding why the DNR has made a turnaround, or at least appears to have made a turnaround, on how they're treating the Noranda project in the willow flowage compared to the Ladysmith project. That, I mean, there's no question that the mine in Ladysmith is going ahead, but that is not the end of the battle, and certainly it is neither a foregone conclusion that there's ever going to be a single ounce of copper that is shipped out of Ladysmith. All sorts of things can intervene between now and then, and we'll talk about some of those things later.
Just wanted to add a footnote about Rio Tinto zinc. When Columbus set sail over 500 years ago to conquer this hemisphere, he originally wanted to set sail from the port of Cadiz, but couldn't do it because the port was too full of ships transporting Jews out of Spain because of the Spanish Inquisition. So he went to the port of Palos, which happens to be at the mouth of the Rio Tinto. And in the 1950s, some British financial interests founded a zinc mine on the Rio Tinto and called themselves Rio Tinto Zinc. And what I've heard lately is that the pollution from not just that mining operation, but other mining operations has silted up the river, the Rio Tinto itself, so badly that the spot where Columbus set sail is now on land. So think about it, everything comes full circle. We also had something handed to us. For anyone who's not going to be here this afternoon, who has to go off, one reason we don't have a lot of media here, we had one TV station from Wausau, is that we're up against a guy named George Bush, who's in Stevens Point today. And he's going on his train through the state. And if anybody wants a free train ticket, this was handed to us, for anyone who wants to disturb or heckle. It says, admit one family, paid for by Bush Quail 92. Gates open at 3 p.m. Wisconsin Central Limited Depot in Stevens Point. So this is for the taking. We've got some time for 2 quick questions, and then we really have to break for lunch. And of course, for people who want to talk more about strategy, tomorrow morning are the strategy workshops, and they'll be real intensive. Thank you.
Okay, it's been touched on, addressing to the panel here. You guys have been working the trenches for years. What's your gut feeling about getting to know the corporations, to get to know the people, the names, the faces, their relationships? And what would be the value, perhaps, on a long-term permanent basis of literally buying stock, number one, in a company, and utilizing perhaps this new law that the Securities and Exchange Commission, I think, as I understand it, has passed this year, to learn more about the compensation of the officers, and maybe more importantly, the ability of stockholders to get to know who the other stockholders are and how to pursue that. Would that be worthwhile, and what do you think? To get better strategy, more effective strategy with the companies.
This is one of the things that the Mole-Sikagan Chippewa did. It's also one of the things that the Recruiter Chippewa did in the Rio Tinto Zinc situation. Whenever you have the opportunity to address the people whose money is on the line on these projects and make a pitch to them that is not in their financial interest to engage in operations which are characterized by large-scale social resistance at the local level, or which are high risk in terms of environmental catastrophe, people do, regardless of their social or environmental responsibility, think twice about these projects. And it certainly has an effect on the board of directors. That's certainly the case with the Exxon Corporation. I think that was one of the reasons why Exxon decided to pull out. The last meeting that Exxon had in the local area, before they pulled out, they had their local project manager there, which was one of these toadies that gave these glowing reports of how great everything was going. But then Houston flew in their vice presidents to see what the local reaction was to the the pronouncements of a local representative, and it became quite clear at those local meetings that these representatives were on the defensive all the time. And I think that was one of the decisive factors that led them to pull out. Same thing with Rio Tinto Zinc. Rio Tinto Zinc has been listed on Survival International's list as one of the top 10 violators of native rights around the world. The first place where they are listed is Ladysmith for violating the rights of the Lake Superior Chippewa. So I would certainly recommend people have contacts with churches, with insurance companies, with university pension plans that have stock, or could be persuaded to buy stock in any of these mining corporations, that is an excellent way of putting pressure on the corporations.
Another question? Or should we eat?
When's lunch?
Lunch is upstairs, and thank you to the panelists. And we're going to meet here at between 1 and 1:15 for the next panel, which is about Miranda.
Get my legs going here again.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.